Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back. Another episode of Chasing Legends. Happy Monday to everybody. Please hit our website, www.legendsuperstition Mountains. You'll find the bark notes, archive stuff, all kinds of cool stuff, and we'll be adding through this summer heavily. Hope you're enjoying all that. Go to our About section for anything else. Website pretty much covers everything as well, but thank you again for watching. Hope you're enjoying the Friday episodes. We got a couple more to go, I think, here. So before we wrap up this season, and we got stuff already in the can, and we'll be moving on to the next, probably. Never know what we'll do. That all being said and done, today, I decided I was doing nothing. And I think I told Trevor, I said, I'm going to have breakfast. We'll shoot a video later. I ain't going to do nothing today. And then, of course, after probably, I think 30 minutes of sitting on the couch, I told Trevor, we're going to go, we need to spread topsoil out in the yard and do all this stuff. So we picked up about 800 to 1,000 pounds of manure, and then we spread manure. And then I was like, man, I got to wonder what I got to talk about tonight, because after you spread that much bullshit, you don't feel like telling any personal stories or other stories. It kind of got the bullshit spread out of me. That's a joke. That being said and done, I thought there's something I've been working on, and usually you don't want to talk about a lot of things work in progress, but this I was, because your head gets filled with a lot of the stuff you're working on, and as you're moving forward, why not just kind of cleanse the palate a bit? So there we are. So this week we're going to talk about the beginnings of the Dawns of Arizona. Thank you very much to my friend Greg Davis. I've been going through the archives of the Dawns, which I don't even know, what, 10, 12 file cabinets about 5 feet tall, and then there's stuff piled everywhere, and we've been going through material, and I've been trying to work on the rosters in the early years and so forth, and I'd like to share that. I shared it at a Dawns meeting to some degree with everyone. It's an interesting kind of focal point to start with. So in 1929, a gentleman named Sam Bryant comes from El Paso, Texas. A gentleman named Sam Bryant comes from El Paso, Texas. And he's a membership secretary for the YMCA. He comes to Phoenix, Arizona on a transfer. And when he comes in, he starts talking to a number of the members there and the instructors, and says, hey, there's a club we have that's been kind of spreading through the U.S. in the YMCA. It's called the Emblem Club. And it's like a lunch club. A lot of people get together. It's a small group, maybe 15, 20, 25 people. And they have lunch one day a week. They'll have a guest speaker about, current events, civic type stuff, and then they'll kind of occasionally go out and do something, represent the Y. And he spoke to a number of people. Art Weber was one of these people, Orrin Arnold, who was in the physical fitness program down there. And so he talked to some people. Now, one of the perceptions is you always think YMCA is like, well, one, you're thinking village people. But secondly, you're thinking a bunch of young Christian men. Most of these guys are around 30 years old. And they go down there to work out and physical activities. Plus, it's a club where it would have a volleyball team, a basketball team, a swim team. And they do some competitions in and around town. They start discussing this whole idea, but they got to recruit a number of people to kind of be in the club. Art Weber is part of the physical fitness club. Orrin Arnold is in that group. So they recruit some people from different parts of the Y. Hey, would you be interested in doing this? We're going to talk about this. So finally in April, they get together, and in the Arizona Republican, they announce the first meeting of the group. And there's a new group. It's called the Emblem Club. And they're going to get together. It'll be 20 to 25 people. They're going to get together at these lunches and discuss the stuff. And it's within the YMCA. And all this, and they kind of start to one of the first things they do is they don't like the name Emblem Club, so almost immediately they change the name, like, okay, let's just call ourselves the Triangle Club. So they change it to the Triangle Club, the Triangle, which was a part of the YMCA. If you see their old logos, they always had the triangle, mind, body, and spirit. And there's basically, from what I've always gathered, there's supposed to be 20 to 25 people. There's 26 people involved initially. One gentleman, I can't find anything out about him. Not just with the club, but anything about him, period. So I don't know if that's why they always say the 25. So they get together, there's an announcement in the paper, and these guys start having meetings down through the... Well, they get into the fall, and they have their first president, and then who was Orrin Arnold. No, it wasn't... Yeah, it was Orrin Arnold, I think. I'm trying to think. Well, anyways, I think it might have been Harold Marks. They have their first president, and then they do these odd thing of like, they decide to have the president in April, and then elect another president in October, then the next April, so you run a 6-month term, basically. But then the other thing, outside of that initial year, they don't do a lot through the summer, because people are taking vacations, it's hot in Phoenix. But they're meeting at the Y, having lunches, and as they're doing this and all, the next thing they do is they're sitting around, and David Marks is an attorney. His father was a well-known attorney, worked for the U.S. District Attorney's Office. Ed Green's a part of this initial group, and Ed Green's an attorney. Like I said, Art Weber was part of the YMCA. Orrin Arnold's an author, editor of the Arizona Republic, and a journalist. And most of these guys are involved in banking, they're attorneys, that type of stuff. And Ed Green's a transplant from back east, is getting into Arizona history. Orrin Arnold's already writing articles and wanting to write books about Arizona and the Southwest. That's kind of his thing. Art Weber's been out here. I think he might have come from Pennsylvania. He was into the Southwest and stuff. And they start getting together and say, let's go do some hikes. So they start doing some hikes around town, and then they have picnics. They have the women out, and they have the wives once in a while, because it's basically a men's club. And it's designated to be 18 to 35. You're a member of the Y and all this stuff. And then they all sit down and go like, well, Triangle Club's kind of cool, but let's come up with a better name. So of the 25 people that vote, I think it's 11 of them vote in favor of the name Dons. Now, they have the name the Ranchers Club, the Phoenix Club, the Towns Club, the Caballeros Club. They have a bunch of Rodeo Club. They have all these different names. Some are Southwest and all. But Dons of Arizona, like the Gentlemen of Arizona, was because their prominent thing, the Spanish, and how the Spanish came into the Southwest and so forth like that. So they vote. 11 members say, yeah, Dons is the number one choice. It doesn't tell you anything else about how popular any of the others were, and they become the Dons of Arizona. So they're now the Dons of Arizona. Their guest speakers are occasionally current events, civics, but there's a lot of people like former governors and people involved, historians coming in, talking about Southwest history and stuff. And as they're moving forward doing this, they're kind of looking around and going, well, the Y's been really good to us, but the Y has the stipulation you have to be a member of the Y. So anybody we want to be in the club has to go join the Y, and then they can be a member of the club. So their next thing is, you know what, thank you YMCA, it's been great, but we're going to start meeting for lunch at the Arizona Club, which was down at the Lures building at the time. They had 4 floors there. And the Arizona Club was a men's club. It had a floor for meetings, ballroom dancing, dinner events and stuff. You could get it for, a wedding, that sort of thing. And they had a floor that was men only exclusive, there where men could come in and they'd have rooms they could stay for a while. Let's say the women and the children had went back east to visit mom. The men could come down there, get their meals, have drinks, sit down, shoot pool, play cards. But it was men only on that floor. And the Dons would remain at the Arizona Club till I think the early 70s, 71, 72. So, and the Arizona Club eventually moved out of the Looters building, but they stayed with the Arizona Club for a long, long time. And there were some members of the Arizona Club that joined the Dons. But predominantly at this time, the Dons makeup is still, again, it's, you would look at it and go, oh, that guy works for, the Waters Association, Users Association, which became SRP, or Central Arizona Power and Electric, which became APS. And you realize most of these people work in the legal sections, and they're clerks and so forth, and businessmen. And it's very kind of interesting to see where these men come from. A lot of them went and were in the war. A lot of officers and people like that, lieutenant colonels and stuff who served in World War II in Korea. A number of the members, because I told you before, they weren't that old. They had served in World War I already. So it's kind of an interesting mix of group of people, and you realize, okay, they're not a bunch of just young guys, but they start going out on these hikes. And there's an initial group of 5 or 6 of them that always go out. I mentioned Orrin Arnold and Art Weber. I mentioned Sam Brandt. I mentioned Ed Green. And this kind of core group is the guys going out in the Superstitions. They go out and make trips. They're looking for the Lost Dutchman Mine and this, and they bring other people along occasionally. And then Ed Green and all of them are sitting around and said, well, you know, it'd be really cool to go out and do that. Well, Orrin Arnold writes a newspaper article, and in his newspaper article, which was picked up by a magazine, he talks about the Dons of Arizona, this new group, and all what they're doing, and they've been searching for the Lost Dutchman. And they get barraged by letters. Hey, I got a map. I know where the Lost Dutchman is. I've heard that one before. Well, anyways, they get all this publicity out of it, not intending it. It was him just saying, yeah, we go out and do this. And it's not necessarily the focus of the club necessarily. Maybe. We don't know. But they all sit back and say, hey, all these people are interested. It'd be really cool to do something out there and tell people how dangerous the mountains are and tell them the story of the Dutchman and that type of thing. So what they do is, it's November, December, 1933. They talk and decide they're going to have an event in January and then switch it up to basically, I think it's March in 1934, and they call it the Trek, the Don's Trek. They do it out at First Water Ranch. It's out there by the First Water Ranch. The Barkley family kind of helped them pick a spot. And they go out, cars parked, supposed to be 100 people show up. Next thing they know, 300, 400, 500 people show up. They got this overwhelming crowd. All the women have to go back in town and start cooking more beans because they had a kind of a Mexican Spanish style dinner with a lot of beans and tortillas. Frank would have left in disgust. So they realize it's a huge success. Now, this is a little club that charges like $1.50 a month for dues, meets for lunch once a week. We have dinner parties and dancing parties, have the spouses come out, and they occasionally have hikes and stuff, and they're like, wow, that was really cool. We got a lot out of that. Well, let's keep doing that. And they talked about doing it because the trek was only one day, and almost all its career was one time a year. A couple times they tried it twice in a year, but the manpower it includes, and someday maybe we'll do something in-depth on Trek, and I'll show you like the file thickness of just a single year of Trek, of the people involved and a lot of the material and getting it to run. It took weeks of preparation, and then that day's event, incredible amount of work. They do the Trek. Goes off phenomenally well. Everything's going really good. And they're coming up with ideas. This is this little lunch club of 20, 25 guys. There's about 35 of them now. And they've got a few people dropped out, a few more people come in, but it's still this core group. Every 6 months, president change. Interesting with the Dons. I don't think being the president is more like a thank you for a lot of you've done in the club. He runs the meetings, but there's always a core group of 5, 6 people that run the Dons. Not necessarily the board of directors, because you will notice almost all their ideas. So they do this, and so they decide we need a bigger place for Trek, because that was kind of small. If we're getting 400 or 500 people, what are we going to do? Eventually they would cap at 1,500 to 2,000 people for the one-day event and sell tickets. But so they go down, they start looking in the mountains, take a number of trips in the mountains looking for a better site. They take this old dirt road that goes back towards the quarter circle U. It's not much of a road. It's more like a trail. And they find this spot, and one of the people owns property back in there. There's a number of people over the years that were ranching back in there, would let them use the spot there. There's a big flat area. So they go to use that, and they're like, okay, this will work out really good. And it's just actually kind of north. It's kind of where the horse parking lot is today, up by the Peralta Trailhead. They come in, and they go to settle in there and stuff, but they realize the road is not going to work. And they also realize we can't bring in 300, 400, 500 cars. So what do we need to do? Well, this is what we'll do. We'll use buses. So people can meet here, get a ticket, and then they can get on a bus, and we can bring them out on the buses. But the buses still need to be able to make it out. So what's known as Peralta Road today, it actually is not where the existent road was all the way. It's changed. But they went out, and over that next year, They went out and slowly widened and worked out the roads so you could have easy access in any vehicle and so forth to the Dons area where the Dons camp is. So the Dons not only are responsible for opening up the Peralta Trailhead to some degree. Additionally, that was Willow Canyon, and it became Peralta Canyon, and they started naming things down in there. So at that point in time, 1934-35, the Dons' impact has been incredible in there. They've been around for just a few years. Their name and stuff. In fact, the Secretary of State in Arizona designated that was a misdemeanor offense. If you were no longer a Don or not a Don at all, and you wore the insignia, a hat, a shirt, or the pin of the Dons, that was a misdemeanor offense. So it was becoming quite a big deal to be a part of the Dons. Makeup of the Dons was a little of everything. There were Freemasons. There were people from the Knights of Columbus, the Kiwanis Club. There was a lot of people involved in business and stuff. But like I said, there was a lot of people. There were eventually, predominantly, it was attorneys and banking officials. And then later, there would be a lot of architects and engineers involved. So this is working out, and the trek works out great and beautifully for them. KTAR radio, and which was another cool thing early in these first years. KTAR radio was an unaffiliated little radio station in Phoenix. And the Dons started doing programs on there, volunteering, and then there was a weekly Dons radio program. And when they started doing that, they helped petitioning to get KTR a designated network, which became NBC. And to this day, it's still NBC. So NBC's affiliation with Phoenix part of it began with the Dons doing the radio broadcast and the Dons interaction. A number of people that worked in that industry in radio and early television were members of the Dons. So all this, and then it helps the Dons because that allows them publicity. Remember, they got the Arizona Republic. Now they have the first radio station and television and some of the local affiliates. They have members there. So the Dons are continuing to move this forward. And then their other bright ideas like, well, let's tell people we'll meet down here and we'll take a drive out and we'll go to this place. And we're doing, at this point, every Don is required at some time to give a speech. He's supposed to read books and stuff and become educated on a certain topic. And then he tells the other Dons, and then all the other Dons become educated on it. That way they start sharing information and becoming more educated to teach about the Southwest and the history. So they're doing this, and then they decide we can go to some of these places. Let's drive out here and drive out there, and we'll tell people, and they can come out. And the Dons at this point have vests, and they have certain outfits. They have the sombreros early on primarily, but they dress up a bit. So they take these people out and they tell them about the history of Arizona and so forth. Kind of neat. Well, about the third, fourth, fifth one, they go to do to Wickenburg. They meet at the state capitol as usual, and about 300-400 cars show up. There's like 5 Dons in a vehicle that are taking this. They said it that day, literally, when the Dons arrived in Wickenburg, the last car was leaving the state capitol parking lot. So that was when they got involved, and I think a man's name is Youngblood. He became a Don, and that helped because he worked with Greyhound and was able to coordinate and get them buses. So they were able to work buses into this with the trek and with that to get people to buy tickets to be on the bus. Because the other problem they were having with this, what became Travelcade for many, many, many years and toured all over the United States with the Dons, not just Arizona. Eventually you're going to Yellowstone, you're going to Canada, you're going down into Mexico with the Dons. People would show up without a ride, and they would go car to car till they could find someone that had room and would let them come in the car and go with them. So the Dons always made it a big thing that they were never trying to make money on Trek. They were never trying to make money on Travelcade, cover the costs, but it was about educating and promoting the Southwest. So at about this time, I've talked about this, is they decide, well, we need to tell people more about the superstitions. So they pay Orrin Arnold, and Orrin Arnold gets some money, and Orrin Arnold sits down and writes a book, and the book gets published by the Dons of Arizona, and it does very well. And today we know it as Ghost Gold, but it was known Superstition Gold initially. And that book was one of the first publishings directly on the superstitions, and it was by the Dons. Shortly after that, a gentleman named Barry Storm met Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was a Don of Arizona, an honorary lifetime Don most of his life. And Barry Goldwater helped finance, and with the Dons set up Barry Storm's first book, Trail of the Dutchman, which if you open up the cover, I believe it has a picture of the Dons, and it has an acknowledgement forward by the Dons. I think it's Lust for Gold is, or not Lust for Gold, Thunder God's Gold is the one that has Barry Goldwater has the introduction to it. But it's very interesting that in this first, you're basically looking at 6, 7, 8 years, the group has this much impact. I've never they must have been gung-ho as heck. They had their day jobs, they're meeting down here. Of course, they're meeting in the evenings, they have summer meetings. But about 3, 4 months of the year, they're not even doing much other than just planning some stuff out, physical activity. But then they get into more of the traditional Spanish Dawn uniforms and the sombreros and hats, and it's a pretty good sized group. I've always thought there were a lot of friends, a lot of people involved, and there were a lot of volunteers, but pretty much the core of this is about 30 people, 30 to 35 men and their wives, pulling these giant events off and all this work. They were pretty successful, so I'm sure that's where they were able to draw a lot from. Now, after a number of years, the Forestry Service saw that they were having this property and so forth, and they realized that the Dons continued to have the trek, and they looked for an area to have the fire fall. They were worried about at one point of the Forestry Service moving them out, so they actually purchased land out by Peralta Road, down by the Donnelly Ranch, I believe, or the King's Ranch, maybe over that way. So they were looking for another spot, and the Forestry Service settled and gave them the lease for where we have the Dons Camp today, which kind of started temporary. I think the amphitheater was one of the things they put in early on to seat people, and then there wasn't like necessarily physically permanent structures as much in the camp, and it grew over time to what it is today. But that's all to come, and it's pretty amazing run when you're sitting back looking at the Dons. You realize it's a group of probably 3, 4, 5 guys that say, hey, let's get a lunch club together and hang out and talk about current events and stuff. Yeah, okay. And even some of the people involved in the Dons in the 60s, 70s, and 80s didn't quite understand the impact this group had. I mean, the monument for the Lost Dutchman Mine that is in Apache Junction, that basically is the symbol of the city, that is because of the Dons. They were looking to have them remove that out of there, which was kind of a shame, because they built a monument in front of the monument. That monument's been there since the 30s. It's funny how even with progress, they're still utilizing the very thing that gave birth to something, and yet they're just trying to push it out of the way. That's kind of old hat. In fact, there's a number of people I've talked to the last few years that had been very involved and worked and knew a lot of the Dons and the events out there for many, many years, and thought the Dons had just gone away. They didn't understand or know about Discovery Camp, and that the Dons have been still existing the last 15, 20 years, and a number of us are out there. But I've been delving into that, and I think there's a lot of interesting history. I think when people see the Dons and stuff, and they see Discovery Camp and the Rendezvous, which is a Don-sponsored event and involved, well, obviously myself, Greg, Davis, Frank, all of us are Dons. But when you see that and understand the involvement of the Dons kind of behind the curtain, underneath it all, and what is accomplished, it's pretty amazing. In fact, someone thought the Dons trek was similar to the Rendezvous. Oh, they get a few hundred people out and this, and I'm like, no, it was thousands of people, and there would be these groups going all the way out to Weaver's Needle and Geronimo's Cave on these long hikes all day. And once they understand the what encompassed how big this was in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s, things start to lull. But when they realize how big of an event this was, it's amazing. There was a number of the members that were important parts of the Arizona JCs, the Barrow Neurological Institute, and so for that. So you see there's a lot of movers and shakers, which is what let me know this is why the Dons were successful. You had some of the biggest, brightest minds, may not be in the history book, but they're the people moving and shaking within and coming from prominent families that are involved with this group. And they weren't trying to be all powerful running everything. They thought, well, civic duty, let's do something to educate people, promote things, and do this and within this. So very cool. I've went through a lot of the photo collections, seen some of the parades and the floats they put in the parades. You can just see how much money and effort they were putting into everything. You're always expecting it to be like, oh, yeah, what could they do? 25, 30, 35 people. And then you're like, wow, that's kind of impressive. And we've shown some of the videos of what those guys are doing. So you can't sit back and just say, well, they were a bunch of attorneys and businessmen. What could they really do when you see them hauling that charcoal? Now, this is back, remember, when men were men. Men could sling and do this. They were pretty hard working, and they pretty much weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. But at the same time, they were also businessmen and movers and shakers in the industry. Very different time and place than today of what you see. So there you are. That's a good, concise, early history of the Dons from probably, in their inception, we generally think is 1930-31, but going back into 1929, up into the late 30s, and then beyond, and even today in existence, because I believe today we'd be in our 90-some-odd year, and pushing towards that 100-year anniversary, which is one of the reasons I'm working on a lot of the histories. So there you go. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I know we've shared some of this stuff. Always look up those names of those individuals and those founders because they were very, very important. Very important gentlemen in and around Phoenix because they were involved with a number of different organizations and kind of all ended up mixing it up and coming up into the Dons and moving and shaking. And always support the Dons and the events today. The rendezvous coming up this year in November. And of course, anytime, Discovery Camp, we always can use volunteers. If you want to come out, work with the Dons and the kids and stuff, let them know, and they can make you an amigo or an amiga. It doesn't mean you have to be a Don's member. You can be a friend of the Don and come out and work with us with these events and stuff, gold panning, roping, indigenous stuff, hiking. There's a lot of events and stuff we do from 6 Fridays through the winter. So there you go. Thank you for joining us. Hope I didn't bore you too much. Hey, I absolutely didn't sling any bullshit today. See, I did all that earlier. And if this was smell-o-vision, you'd be turning your nose up at this video and it'd only get about 3 views before everybody clicked off. So there you go. I'm Wayne Tuttle. Always remember that because that's the most important thing when you're sitting there at home and it's Monday and we get down to the end of this and you're getting ready to click it off because some of you are waiting around for that last part because you want to know who the hell is that guy. Always remember I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.